Love this podcast? Support it and sponsor today. Simply head to ozcastnetwork.com for details.
Why don't you write when you don't need money, honey? That would certainly make a hit.
Okay, so welcome to Word Docs. I am Alex Vickery Howe. I've had coffee, so I'm a little bit peppy all of a sudden. I'm here with Amy Matthews.
Hi.
And Sean Williams.
Hello. I'm trying a new sexy voice to try and compete with Alex's sexy voice. How's it working?
Is that the Decameron
No,
voice?
it's not the Decameron voice. I'm never doing that voice again.
They've actually done cultural research on different cultures and what they find attractive.
Oh.
And in the West, with men, it's that gravelly kind of tone. But in Japan, with women, those high-pitched voices are really attractive.
Really?
Which I've always found sort of...
Careful. Careful.
choosing my words carefully. A little bit Mickey Mouse-like. I'll just stay with that. You know, is that the most offensive thing I could have come out with?
So I remember being in Germany and watching Seinfeld dubbed back in the 90s. And they dubbed them in completely different voices. It had never occurred to me that, of course, that happens. And because Seinfeld's the main character, he gets a big, deep, authoritative voice. And because Kramer's the silly character, he gets this high, squeaky Mickey Mouse voice, and it was weird. It was too weird to watch.
Jack Thompson, the Australian actor, Noni Hazelhurst was telling a story at Flinders once about Jack Thompson talking to the person who dubbed him in Asia, the man, and going, well, we're all actors under the skin. You know, Jack Thompson's very ochre in a way that Alex Vickery Howe isn't, you know.
I bet he could roll a cigarette with one hand.
He can roll a cigarette. Yeah, he could do it. And then, of course, he saw the dubbing, and this guy had a very high-pitched voice. And apparently, Noni just saw the colour drain from Jack Thompson's face in this moment. Apologies to Noni if I've told that story wrong.
Not enough coffee. I think there needs to be more coffee.
All of this is an uncomfortable segue to Alex's rant. This is why I've had coffee. We've had our Notting Hill rant, so this is Alex's rant about metaphor and theme in general. So I'm currently working on a sort of secret project, only secret because it hasn't been announced. It's nothing dangerous or explosive or anything like that.
You're not a spy or anything.
I'm not a spy. There's a hint to the project I'm doing because it's about spies. And they asked me to do this audio course as part of this project, how to write for audio. And it was a good course, really kind of snappy and a good lesson, in fact, in how to teach online. But towards the end, they raised the issue of theme. And this is on like the third unit of this course. And you can see there's like a list of topics. So you can see that theme is coming. And it's sort of towards the end. And they just come on screen and they go, theme... don't worry about it. Just don't worry about it. And you go, I've waited this long to get to don't worry about it. Just let it go. They don't really sound like that, but in my mind they do.
Don't worry about it. That sort of...
Don't worry about it.
Bad American accents. Amy, have you got a bad American accent that you would like to throw?
I've got bad all accents. I have got a tin ear. I can't sing. I can't do impersonations, and I can't do accents.
I had to play a Scottish drug dealer on stage, and I was terrible. The line was, as for jail, it's no often that I agree with that wee poofy Tory knock on the tail there, but something like that. That was one of the lines.
Oh my God.
And
are we using that word on this show?
I might have to bleep it.
It was kind of incomprehensible, I hoped. But the dialogue coach, actor friend I worked with, just went on opening night. He went, "Your Pakistani was excellent." Never got that accent right. But moving on, I like the course, and if anyone guesses what this course is, and if you're out there, please don't be offended. But I just kind of thought, this is a bit of a bugbear with me, where I actually think the theme of a story matters. Now, their advice is not necessarily bad. Don't worry about it till later. That's not necessarily bad advice. But I was hoping for a deeper conversation, because one of the things I say to students all the time is, what is it about? What is it really about? about? And what is it about is probably plot. You know, what is it about? Okay, Harry Potter is about a young orphan who discovers he's a wizard and he's part of this grand legacy and prophecy, and Voldemort turns up and so on. That's the plot. What is it really about is the deeper kind of thematic content. And I think there's all sorts of things going on, using Harry Potter as an example, with the sorts of conversations JK has on Twitter, her politics that she wears on her sleeve, and it comes out in her other stories as well. But when you look at Harry Potter and who are the villains, well, they're these blonde, blue-eyed people who are obsessed with pure blood. You know, they're classist, they're racist in a kind of unusual way. You know, there's themes about parental neglect, or, you know, his uncle and aunt being kind of borderline, well, I'd say abusive rather than neglectful, and so there's other things going on that give a story life. I often talk about Twilight, don't particularly love it, but you know what Stephanie Meyer's philosophies are through her work. You know, as a Mormon, she doesn't like the Catholic Church, so who are the villains in Twilight? Well, they hang out in basically the Vatican and they tell you what to do. You know her views on abortion. Well, the Twilight has a baby that's eating you from the inside, but don't abort. You know her views on sex before marriage, and Twilight is, I don't know how many books on, we can't do anything until we're married. And you're like, you're a vampire. Do you really still care? You know, so...
he's a Mormon vampire, so...
He's a Mormon vampire. I mean, essentially is. And she's quite open. I'm not a fan of Stephanie Meyer necessarily as a writer. Is it Meyer or Meyer?
I don't even know. Meyer.
I'm not necessarily a big fan, but I do respect that she kind of went, how do I share my worldview in a way that young people will like? Well, I'll dress it up in vampires because that's popular right now.
Does she do that though, or is that just her worldview and it just comes out?
Well, I think it just seeps through, because the other point I would make is, no matter what I would argue, and you feel free to disagree with me, I would argue that your worldview is going to seep through in your writing, whether you try and stop that or not.
Yes.
It would be very hard, for example, if someone said, Alex, I want you to write, I mean, it'd be a brilliant exercise. I want you to write a conservative right-wing play. And I would, that would be a very interesting challenge. But at some point, there's going to be a line in there that's subversive or that it's just going to happen. So I'm always interested in what are the issues that keep writers writing when the money's not very good, when you're there, for I don't know how many hours into a session, when you're typing away on I was going to say a typewriter, but it's more likely to be a laptop with your quill, or if you're Barbara Cartland with some minion on your divan that you just kind of dictate to, so I'm interested in that. And I think, I suppose the conversation is, one aspect of the conversation is it conscious or pre-conscious or unconscious? And I think from what you guys just said, perhaps it's unconscious with a lot of people.
I think it's all three, actually.
I agree.
But is it, to me, it's something that should be important. I think it should be important. And I don't know at what point of the process it should be acknowledged, but I think it should be acknowledged. And I think...
it's interesting because you and I, with our topics, are both very interested in ideology. Like when we look at our
I do a lecture
teaching,
on ideology. Yeah.
And my historical fiction is very much dealing with grand narratives and ideology and theory. But I think we're very fascinated by that and are quite conscious. But a lot of people aren't. Like if you go to different writing groups, and particularly, we're coming from a university environment with a lot of scholars and people who've done PhDs and people who are very introspective and have written exegeses. And that's a very different way of practicing than some people who have never been to university even and are working writers who aren't necessarily thinking in these ways. Would you agree, Sean? Because you've been in the industry a long time. You've been in a lot of writers' groups, a lot of conventions.
Yeah.
There are some people who are more about the plot and story and it may be all unconscious. And then there are some of us in the academy who are very, very conscious.
Who are sort of forced to be conscious in a way because the research targets force us to be reflective of our work in a way that I imagine in the industry you're not necessarily. I suppose in interviews, though, you're asked to do that, though, aren't you?
Oh, yeah. I was just about to say, you have readers and critics and interviewers who will call you on stuff and ask you questions. And as a jobbing writer, which I was for a long time, and I dropped out of university to become a writer and was largely self-taught until I went back to do a PhD and a master's in whenever it was, 2008 or something. I was still thinking about these issues. And Stephen King talks about it in his On Writing book, where he talks about how he writes a first... Yeah, it's a great book. It's one way to approach writing, and he talks about how in his first drafts...
That's That's as cutting as Sean can get. Like, you are so nice and polite. That is the harshest thing I've ever heard you say.
Really? Well, it's a lot of people do hold it up as the Bible of writing, and I just sort of think,
yeah, I was going to say any orthodoxy is a worry, and it has been held up as a Bible. I think it's a brilliant book.
it is a brilliant book. It's also a brilliant memoir too.
Yeah, but that doesn't mean anything that becomes an orthodoxy, I think, is problematic.
Yeah,
absolutely.
So where was I before I stuck the knife into Stephen King's
You're talking
back?
about people reflecting.
That's right.
Yeah. Screw you, Stephen. It's not the only way to do it, man. There are 10.5 commandments, by the way, if you're interested in trying it Sean's way. Sorry, Stephen King, you're talking about even he reflecting on...
That's right, on where theme fits into the story. It's because he acknowledges, as I think every good writer has to acknowledge, that theme and those underlying levels are really important to story. He talks about how his first drafts are all plot and characters, and then by the end of the book, he will know what the book is really about, and that will be what the subsequent drafts are, bringing out what the book is really about, what the themes are, what the underlying story really is.
And he doesn't always get there either, because his books are so organic. Sometimes they're a hot mess at the end, like the last third.
Yeah, often, but I still love them. Yeah, he's weird with endings.
But he still tries, and I think as a writer, I was certainly trying to too, and was very consciously trying to be aware of what messages were coming out through my writing, and trying to subvert them if necessary, or develop them further if I wanted to. But some writers, you do get the sense that they either aren't aware or don't care of their right-wing, sexist, whatever messages that are just naturally in the story. There are some default mindsets that crop up in some writing that I wish wasn't there.
But then this is a point I make in my historical fiction topic, is I think a lot of people more on the liberal spectrum like to think of those defaults as accidental, that they're accidentally showing embedded sexism or embedded, and actually sometimes people are just hate women or are racist and own it.
Yeah.
And like you were saying about, is Stephanie Meyer, is she showing these embedded things, or is this a mission? And some people, really believe stuff that we might disagree with.
Yeah, absolutely.
Right?
Absolutely.
That's what's got J.K. Rowling into trouble at the moment. She's really believing the stuff she's saying.
I don't know who wrote the Divergent, Allegiant, Detergent, wwhatever that series is. but that one's fascinating from an ideological point of view, because the villains are, because the basic plot is that you're sorted into different groups from birth or from puberty. And there's the candor group that never lie. And there's I don't remember what they're all called now, but the villains are the scientific ones.
Oh, wow.
And there's this hilarious thing where they go, the only way to defeat them is to not think logically or scientifically. And you go, the ideology that's coming through there is, so deeply American, I believe, certain parts of America. And I went, and even though I'm into dystopian futures and sci-fi, that just annoyed the hell out of me. I went, what? Don't think scientifically and you can defeat them with your emotion. It kind of drove me mad. But listening to you talk, Sean, the other thought I had is I've come from a theatrical background, and looking at the Decameron and the kind of earnestness that's coming out in those monologues, including some of my own, I think that theatre is used to wearing its politics on its sleeve. I think there are actually market-driven reasons for that. I don't think theatre is viable in a capitalist sense. Like it's a subsidised art form. So it's become a soapbox, if you like, or a soapbox is too strong, but it's become a voice for a kind of progressive leftist worldview. I've never seen, to the very best of my knowledge, a right-wing play. And I'll go even further. I don't think I've seen many centrist plays. I think most plays are left-leaning.
No,
not new ones.
Shakespeare is...
yeah, plenty. You go back to like some of the older stuff, George Bernard Shaw or
Yes.
Shakespeare or what have you. But so I think we're used to thinking in ideological terms more explicitly. And I say that as someone who's very left-leaning and certainly environmentally probably radically left-leaning. It's an interesting criticism because part of me has got this little secret desire, not so secret desire now, to chip away at that and go, well, can I write a character who doesn't come from that end of the spectrum? Will people let me? And I think that's interesting.
Do you know what's interesting here is thinking about theatre, that we're maybe the centre right has gone, not completely, and where the capitalism has gone is musical theatre, right?
Oh, that's interesting.
So not something like the Book of Mormon necessarily, but...
Or Hamilton, but
Lloyd Webber or...
I think that's a thought. That's a really brilliant thought, because I was having a conversation with someone in theatre recently, and that thought was in the back of my mind, but I didn't voice it. I thought, that is where the kind of centrist, populist model for theatre has gone. It's around the big musicals. But I set an exercise, and I'm going to do this in a workshop next week, where you say to students, okay, let's talk about ideology. I want you to write down the thing you care most about in the entire world. I want you to write that down. And that might be, you may come from a racial minority or a gendered minority, whatever that may be, whatever that deep issue is for you. And now I want you to write a monologue from the opposite point of view.
Yeah.
And that's a fun exercise, because no one sees it coming. They think that I'm going to say, write a monologue about what you care about. But actually, no, theatre's or any kind of writing should have an act of empathy at its core, so that characters can interact with each other and share different points of view. So I often throw that one out there and just see what happens. And I'm kind of interested in complicating that space a bit. And yes, and perhaps my obsession with theme and ideology comes partly from that background, where we're really, I would argue, and especially in a project like the Decameron, plot and story are a distant second to the issue at the heart of it.
And character, I guess.
Character, yeah.
Thinking as you're talking, even in very commercial genres, so if you take something like romance, you can't get away from it. So I've been thinking, you were talking about Stephanie Meyer, and it got me thinking about the fact they can't have sex, and then thinking about this battle in the world of romance over the terminology around what used to be called kind of sweet romance, where you close the door and you never see sex, or they never have sex, and kind of more explicit stuff. And there's a kind of movement that I think is based in the Christian American environment that calls it clean romance and dirty romance. And then yeah, right?
Ooh.
And so then there's this battle going on with a lot of people who want to call out the word clean. Like you're saying sex is dirty, you're saying all this kind of, this slut shaming going on, and it's very much, I think, located in a kind of very conservative Christianity. But that's fascinating, because that means every time you write a romance, you're making an ideological choice, right? You're representing sex. And then there's been a lot of discussion, romance was very on the forefront of, say, take Harlequin, Mills and Boon using condoms during the AIDS crisis, like, so making a feature of that. And they've been very much on the forefront about consent, about making sure that in your sex scene at some point there is a moment of consent.
So these are deeply political. I mean,
absolutely.
They are. Inescapably so.
So you take a genre that people think of as kind of light and fluffy and not necessarily consciously engaging with ideology, but of course it always is. There's just no way it's not.
Well, I think we're living in a really polarised time, largely due to social media. I know that's a cliche, but I think it's true. I mean, we're living in a time where the wearing of masks is a political statement or an ideological statement.
Do you think that was, sorry, this is going off on a tangent, but maybe inevitable because we got rid of a hegemony? Like if you say, straight white men, you're no longer the only ones in charge, were you always going to get some kind of polarity as you work through that?
I don't know. I have conflicting views of that, because part of me says, the ripples settle and the pond goes back to what it was. And it's not what I want to see happen, but there is a part of me that goes, that can be what happens over time.
I don't know if that's true, though, because I think I do believe a little bit in Obama's long march of history. I think you take steps back, but I wouldn't be sitting here if history didn't march forward.
No, that's absolutely true. But I think what's happening now is something slightly removed from that kind of historical progressive argument. I think it's my pet peeve with my own side of politics, if you like, is that we're more concerned with cancelling than we are with building. And I think that's ultimately problematic, because it's much easier to, and I'm guilty of this on Twitter as much as anyone, it's much easier to stop something than it is to go door to door and actually campaign.
I don't know
for
that
something.
I entirely agree, though, because I think the knee jerk around cancel culture is this is a moment. I think you have to think of consciousness raising, right? That whenever a movement tries to take a leap forward, there has to be this era of consciousness raising, because people said this about PC, that, and I always say to my students, what's really being cancelled? Like on Twitter, yeah, maybe, but actually, and maybe Lewis CK lost his show, but when was he entitled to have a show? When's what in the universe said you get to be a star?
Yeah.
But in terms of all the right-wing stuff is still being made. There's still country music that's deeply white. Like this panic about being cancelled, like, you know, the Fawlty Towers episode with the Germans was taken off. It's like it still exists.
And also, I mean, John Cleese rewrote that when he went on tour. John Cleese rewrote that. So he was quite happy to do that. But, you know, the interesting thing going back to political correctness, because I always say to students, because I did have a student once who just erupted over this. Yeah. And I went, you know, in the 90s, it wasn't such an issue because political correctness boils down to this. Don't be a dick.
Yeah, don't be a dick.
And if you realise you've said the wrong thing, which we all do, then you own it and you say, I'm sorry, I'll try not to be a dick. You know, that's kind of all political correctness really is.
But I will say, like, I've had this fight actually a lot in the last few weeks, and sometimes I sit on the other side of the fence to be like Alex and just stir the pot. But it strikes me that the people who are the most fucking upset about it are the most privileged.
Oh, absolutely.
And if that is the case, maybe shut up. Honestly, if you're the one in power, if you're the white dude, maybe you're not getting it. Like, maybe I don't get it sometimes. And it's funny because I was talking to our colleague, I hope she doesn't mind, Dr. Tully Barnett, who's into digital archiving, and we had a really fascinating discussion. And I know it's a whole field. It's just not my field. But she's talking about the difference between cancelling something and archiving it, right?
Oh, yeah, absolutely. And that's where I feel with the statues, right? Like, you're not destroying history by destroying a statue. That archive will still exist. You just don't have to
destroy it. You can put it in an archive, like books. Like, you don't have to cancel a book. It's in an archive. It can be in a digital archive. It can be, but taking it out of circulation where it can't cause harm in the current moment, right? Where it's got context, so I think the hysteria is just getting up my nose a little bit with cancel culture. It's like, what's really being cancelled, right? Donald Trump's fucking president. Scott Morrison is prime minister. What the fuck is being cancelled, people?
Here's my counter argument, because I do agree with a lot of that, but my counter argument is two things. One, I think we're losing sight of, you know, J.K. Rowling is not Donald Trump. Whatever she is, she's not Donald Trump. And the level of venom she's getting, I don't particularly agree with her perspective, but the level of venom is, I mean, if you scroll through her Twitter feed, you go, this is actually getting quite insane. So I think we're losing sight of a balanced person expressing a view we may not agree with is very different to the crazy president who's holding a Bible upside down while he tear gasses his own people. I think we're losing that nuance to the debate. The other thing I feel is that what I want to see is more building and more progress in the true sense of the word, which is actually about the harder work of, for starters, I think, as a writer, I'm always like, you catch more, do you catch bees or flies? You catch more flies with honey. I'm always looking for ways to bring people in rather than alienate them. And I'm always keeping people, like, my ideal audience in my head is probably my parents, who don't quite get things, but will if you, and that's an awful thing to say about my parents.
This is so great.
But will if you kind of seduce them in, I suppose. Seduce is a weird thing to say about your parents, just for the record.
Totally. So what I would say to that is that then you're talking about privilege talking to privilege, right? And so I had this is a good story, right? So I've got a friend who's Irish and he's lovely, and we were having a bit of a drunken after dinner thing, and we both love to fight. Like, we just love having an argument. And his wife eventually was like, I'm going to bed. and Johnny was just sitting back, arms folded, like, this is going to be fun to watch. And he was talking about feminism, and he's a very much an essentialist, like, believes men are men and women are women. And I was drunk enough to just totally say what I thought, where he was talking about cancel culture. He was saying a lot of the things you were saying, Alex, about sugar and vinegar. And I was like, yeah, but I'm not fucking talking to you. Like, I don't care what you think. And you can't get that through your head because you're a white man who thinks I should be talking to you. I'm not talking to you. I actually don't give a shit whether you approve of what I'm saying or not. I don't care whether you agree with anything I'm saying. And for people in privilege, that's confronting, right?
Yes, so, if we are used to being
listened to, like, maybe I don't.
But then, my counter argument will be, I don't really want the white males to just talk to the white males either. And this gets back back to empathy and storytelling, right? I want people to talk across those barriers.
But I don't think people listen. That's my point, is I don't think a lot of men ever listen when I speak. I don't think black people feel listened to, and I think they get to a point of like, I don't give a shit about you. I'm talking to my people. And I remember seeing, what's her name? Alexis, she wrote Carpentaria. Is it Alexis Wright? I always get confused with Alexis West. I saw her talk when she won the Miles Franklin for Carpentaria, and she talked about the secessionist movement, right, of setting up an indigenous country, like drawing borders, being, we don't want to be part of your country, like we don't give a shit about you, we're going to be, she's just talked about that movement, and it really changed my way of thinking about it, like, oh yeah, of course, like why would you want to be part of this country?
Yeah, eventually you go, I just don't want to play the game because the rules are stacked against me.
But I guess the other thing I was thinking about when you're talking is Twitter, right? The difference between Twitter and the real world, because actually, I don't know whether I'm being polemical, so I'm sorry if I've been yelling at you, but I've been thinking about actually in the real world with the J.K. Rowling thing, I've had lots of really nuanced, interesting discussions. It's Twitter that's the problem.
Well, yeah, I mean, you're limited in terms of the characters you can use, and I'm shocking on those platforms because they do become a sport.
Yeah,
a kind of
but I think
sport.
that's the thing, is that Twitter's toxic, and I try not to go on it very much at the moment because I get really upset, and it sets you up in this polarized way, whereas when you take that conversation, and I've had some very tense conversations about it actually at work with lots of different academics who challenge my thinking. I go away and I think about it and I'm like, yeah, all right, so I'm in a certain privileged position and I hadn't thought of all those things. And I think actually when we sit here like this face to face, we kind of know, it's like when Sean and I argue about Notting Hill, we kind of know we agree on 90% of stuff.
Yeah, and there's those grey areas in between. I think the one we forget about, and I've had a lot of conversations about this, the one that doesn't go talked about as much is actually class. And I say that because
totally.
There has been so many bizarre situations where I've gone, not my story to tell, but someone who came from a very working class background, when I say very working class, I mean dirt poor, who was in a position in a theatre company and was replaced for gender reasons by someone who was very, very wealthy and very privileged and drove multiple BMWs. So that was a really interesting moment for me where I went, where do I stand on this?
Yeah, totally.
Because on the one hand, I'm totally on board with gender parity, and theatre's had a real problem in that way historically. But there was a hilarious meeting one year where they were talking about not enough female playwrights, and someone said, every major company, this is a few years ago, every major company has a female playwright commission this year. And then someone else went, yeah, Lally Katz. It's all Lally Katz. Like every major company has a Lally Katz show going. So there's definite parity issues in that space. But then when you factor in a story like that, you go, now it's in a grey area that's much more difficult to adjudicate. And when I do eventually have these Twitter arguments, and I eventually weirdly befriend some hardcore Republicans. Once you've argued yourself to death, you go, oh, but your dog's really cute. And they go, yeah, you seem all right. You're a good liberal. And then you start to sort of like direct message each other, send each other articles and stuff. And that's when the conversation becomes more nuanced, because there's a class factor here, and I can see the appeal. I think Trump is obviously a monster and a con man and all the rest of it. But these people have been abandoned. I mean, that is true. There's a lot of pride. There's a lot of embedded sexism and racism and other things.
But they also have the entitlement that they should not be abandoned. They also have this privileged position that I deserve it in a way that I think other people have been told that they shouldn't expect it. So I totally agree with what you're saying. But I also think when you talk about sugar catching more flies, that there is, so we just lost John Lewis in the US last week. And he has some great speeches where he talks about you need the violent act or you need the aggression in order to change. Like, no one changes with sugar.
So this is sort of Malcolm X versus Martin Luther King a little bit, isn't it? Like the kind of...
Yeah, but look what happened to Martin Luther King.
Exactly, yeah, exactly. But that kind of, what's the way forward? it? Do you break things, or do you?
No,
or do
I
you,
wouldn't be sitting here if feminists had starved themselves, been beaten, been imprisoned, and I don't think civil rights would have advanced without confrontation and discomfort.
Well, you look at what's happening now and you go, as much as the vast majority of the Black Lives Matter movement is, overwhelmingly peaceful and constructive, the fact of the matter is they can't achieve anything unless there is real rebellion as part of that movement, because it's frankly all the media will focus on.
Absolutely.
And it's the big steps you have to take. So what's interesting about this whole conversation, getting back to where I began, is that this shit matters, right?
It does.
And I think when you write a story, however you approach an issue, I would argue, whether we're talking about catching flies or bees with honey or vinegar or molasses or whatever.
Yo-yos now, I think.
Yo-yos. They don't have yo-yos in Sydney. You can make a really good racket selling yo-yos on the border. But I think it matters. And it's a thing I'm constantly wrestling with, particularly as being a white male of, it's interesting, actually, my class background's quite interesting, because I would say I came from a working class background, but in one generation became a kind of, Moscato sipping snob that my own family doesn't recognise.
Can I just interrupt there for 1 second, because it's a really relevant point, that I have this fight with a family member of mine who is from a very working class background, very impoverished, in fact 2 different family members of mine, who have then gone into very privileged positions, and they make that argument, but I'm working class, and I'm like, yes, but you could do that because you're a white dude who can pass, right?
And I wouldn't make that argument. I would never describe myself as working class.
No, I wouldn't think you would. But no, but I think you could say you're working class, but you acknowledge your privileges. Whereas I think, if you're a black woman or someone who has a disability or so, you can't pass as the ruling class.
I just got acting skills and, changed my voice and all the rest of it. And a lot of charm. But it's an interest, because it's something that I'm constantly wrestling with. And in terms of how to be part of the conversation, but knowing that you can never really be part of the conversation, I think there's that. And one of the things that I've started to think about lately more and more is actually collaboration, and actually going, working with people, if they're open to it, particularly in a theatrical space, is possibly a way through, because I think that's when you find the empathy, when you actually create a story together. Can't do it so much in a novel. I suppose you can. We're talking about collaborations, but I'm kind of interested in the idea of working with someone where we just go, those are your characters, these are my characters, and we're going to talk at each other, and the rule is kind of within reason, anything goes, and see what comes out of that, because talking with is always better than talking for, I think.
I think Alex has forgotten his hosting, so I'm going to wrap us up.
Yeah, we're going to wrap up. We could go on for another hour. We could go on 4 a.m, 6 bottles of whiskey.
This has been fun though, because I know a lot of people get very uncomfortable with conflict, but
Amy and I don't.
We love it.
It's okay.
Notice that I've been taking the role of Johnny in this conversation, just sitting back and watching.
He likes conflict too. He was just happy he wasn't in the eye of the storm that time.
So the bottom line is, when people say theme, don't worry about it. Remember this conversation.
Alex is coming for you. I'd like to come back to some of these issues because I think they're really worth hashing out. But anyway, thanks for joining us. I'm going to take over as host, claim my space. And thank you, Alex, for a really great argument. I enjoyed it. You made me think.
Thanks to both of you for a great discussion. I really enjoyed listening to it.
And we'll see you all next week. Happy writing.
Happy arguing.
Yes.
Why don't you write when you don't need money? All your notes sound alike too much. All of them start with I love you, honey, but they end with the same old touch. Just for a change, send a nice loving letter and cut out that please remit. Why don't you write when you don't need money, honey? That would certainly make a hit.
Recording.
I'm organised, everyone. I'm just watching them fiddle.
Yes.
And what's your sultry voice going to be like this time, Alex?
I'm going to go with a high voice and just see.
You sound just like Mickey Mouse.
Do I have any more credibility this way? Hello, Pluto. I have a few obscure. The other one is she can do it. She can do it.
That's really good. That's actually really good.
I used to be better at this. I've got like too much phlegm in my throat.
Yeah.
Oh, that's charming.
Was that Gollum or Smeagol?
You know, your impressions are never good if you have to then explain who they are afterwards. I can't think of any other. My precious. No, that sounds more almost like Dr. Claw. That's getting too weird. She can do it. So with that line I can do quite well. And it's like, I can only do like one line in Sean Connery, which is...
That's actually really, really good.
Oh, you sizzling, sexy piece of ash. That doesn't quite work either.
If you link those two together, it becomes very disturbing, and you should never do it on dates.
Love this podcast? Support it and sponsor today. Simply head to AuscastNetwork.com for details.